Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Solving Our Data Dilemma session. We'll start in a second, but first I'd just like to welcome you to one of the last sessions of our first ever tech conference. I hope you've enjoyed it so far. It's definitely been in a year like no other, and I guess really illustrates what a sort of technology-enabled lifestyle can achieve. So welcome to this session. We're going to be talking today about all sorts of really interesting issues in sort of achieving usable data. I'm Alyshia Harrington-Clark and I'm policy lead for DC at the PLSA. And today I'm going to chair a session with some really esteemed panelists. So we have Kim Toker, Matt Dodds and Andrew Lowe, who will all introduce themselves when they start their piece. We're going to have quite an open conversation, so please do use the chat box and the Q&A. We're going to talk through some very topical issues such as GMPs, DB consolidation, but we're also going to talk about really the sort of fundamental necessity for accurate and usable data. Please remember to tweet about the session, PLSA Tech 20. As I said, please submit your questions in the Q&A box and we'll take them as we can. And without further ado, I think, Matt, the floor is yours.
Afternoon, everybody. Good to see you all, not that I can, but metaphorically speaking at least. So I'm here really to set the scene on why we even have a data dilemma, basically. So those who don't know me, I'm Matt, I work at ITM, so obviously we're quite focused on technology and very focused on data, and been working on kind of pension scheme data and financial services for about 17 years or so. So we've got a bit of experience in this area, basically. So why do we have a data dilemma? It's a reasonable question to start with, and a slightly risky opening gambit. My initial slide takes a Star Wars quote, potentially completely out of context, so please let the trolls calm down and not be too harsh on me. But the headline I was trying to make really is that what was good enough in the past, and whether you take the past as 10 years ago, 5 years ago, maybe even 259 days ago when we all suddenly switched to doing everything online, things have moved on, and actually that isn't necessarily as great as it seemed at the time, and therefore what was good enough isn't actually that good enough anymore, and certainly things are changing. And the reason things are changing is basically because we have a very, well, for us certainly, a fairly quickly evolving landscape within sort of our nice little pensions bubble. And to move that on in terms of what does the landscape actually look like, if we just move to the next slide, we've called out some examples, and there is almost an infinite list of things you could talk about, and we'll come to some more examples later on via sort of Kim and Andrew. But to call a few out, I've mentioned here about expectation, capability and complexity are all pretty much on a nice upward trend. And it's nice because it's good to see progress, but it's not always helpful in terms of us all doing our day jobs and making it easier for ourselves. But nonetheless, it's very relevant to the kind of challenges we find at the moment. So in terms of expectations, you have members certainly who are gently starting to expect more, and people probably aren't sitting down thinking, I really wish I could do this with my pension via my mobile phone. But the more they can do other things via the mobile phone, and the more they can interact or shop or generally make things easier via technology, when they then come to things like pensions and they can't do that, there starts to become a bigger gap there. People start noticing that, and that can lead to disengagement or frustration. And obviously we don't want that. But it's not just members or customers, there's other players that are part of this. You've got insurers who are playing an increasingly large role in sort of the DB pension scheme strategy. Obviously there is a huge need and desire, and some would say rush, to insure liabilities. And as a result of that, what insurers want in terms of data and the expectations they have, the requirements they have, where they see risks, is something that's changed the landscape that people probably weren't thinking about certainly 10 years ago. Not many were probably thinking about it in much detail 5 years ago, but today and going forward, that's going to play a bigger part in people's thinking around what they need to do with data, what data do they need, where are the risks and where are the gaps and that sort of thing. And then you've got regulators doing their bit as well. So obviously nudging industry to improve sort of reporting and transparency. So it's not just a case of, is the data there, but actually, are you regularly looking at it? Can you quantify where it's not, and all that sort of thing. So there's a fair bit of change from that direction. But you've also then got, as I've alluded to, technology sort of on its own, obviously, is massively enhancing what's possible. And as I mentioned, the more people can do in other areas, the more they'll realize they can't do that. But happily, it's not just in other areas. There are great examples, as we've seen today and yesterday in this conference, of actually where our sometimes slow to adapt pensions bubble is actually doing some great stuff and using technology to make things far better, to do more sort of exciting things and interesting things. So actually, that's a good thing. That's a positive. But then almost, well, not always helpfully, you've then got flexibility and choice. And obviously, people like flexibility and want to embrace it, and that always sounds good. And we've had some legislation that's brought choice in, which changes the landscape. But obviously, that doesn't always make it simpler, because freedom and choice, whilst it's very sort of admirable, doesn't necessarily think about the complexities that some of us live and breathe in terms of the systems we use and the data that is or isn't available, and all the reasons why actually that makes things more complicated. Obviously, pensions has been simplifying for quite a long time. I'm lucky enough that I literally joined the pensions industry on A Day. And I hope lots of people listening won't know what A Day was because they're far too young, but I suspect some do. And I remember joining thinking, oh, great, we're simplifying pensions as of today, so this is going to get much easier. And I'm not sure there's a lot of evidence of how A Day or much since has actually simplified our pensions landscape, but I'm happy to be proved wrong on that. But the point is, it's changing, and as a result, we all need to change with it, otherwise you get left behind quite quickly. And so to move it on, one of the things that not regularly, has occasionally been put to me is that people are fed up of hearing about data. And that could be a fair challenge. And I hope if anyone on this session is fed up of hearing about data, I'm hoping we can change your mind. But in actual fact, I don't think people are fed up of hearing about data. They're fed up of hearing about data when it's a problem, or when it's getting in the way of their strategy, or it's seen as a short-term pain in the backside that they didn't quite see coming. In actual fact, I think you can have data as a positive if you go about it the right way. And that's where really having a strategy around data is key. If you achieve that, then actually you start thinking more about it in the positive. And so in the same way that you think of investment or risk or governance or any other of the key pillars of how to provide pensions and savings, there is an argument to be made that data deserves equal standing, if not greater standing, says a data consultant on the session. But there's a few ways of doing it. You can look on the left-hand side there, the brilliantly hand-drawn graph in terms of how some people, and there are some examples of this, not so much these days, but it still happens a little bit and it's easy to fall into, how you can get caught in this sort of firefighting approach, where you see data as, say, this series of short-term problems, and actually, oh, we're going to pile some effort into that because there's a short-term hump to get over. So you do that, the quality increases a little bit, you take all the effort away, and so on and so forth. You can see what happens. You get these peaks and troughs in demand and effort, and therefore people hearing about data, and then you kind of get a varying level of quality. And in reality, that's because it's not a strategic approach. If you look at the right-hand side, it's preaching to the converted, hopefully. If you level off some of those curves, actually you take a more consistent view, a longer term view, in the same way that you do in many of the other pillars of sort of good governance and good sort of provision. In actual fact, what you need to do then over the course of time, it becomes less, because you can improve the controls, you can improve the automation, you get more robust processes around how you're creating data and maintaining it. And if you do that, actually your effort can start tapering off, but your quality will not taper off. In actual fact, it can probably start increasing because of all the controls and the structures that you've put in place. And so that really is effectively the kind of the key of the introduction. I think there is an argument, as a graphic in the middle suggests, there is an argument, and probably not one that everyone would agree with, depending on where you sit within those segments perhaps, but there is an argument that data could be put at the hub of effectively good governance and good provision of pensions, because it does underpin, it certainly has a huge impact on what we all, I think, would agree are key functions of our sort of day jobs, whether it's administration or communication or investments and actuarial. Data effectively underpins all of those things, and if we don't get that right, it will be a constant nagging doubt, and people will continue to hear bad news about it. I think if we can flip that and turn it into a positive, we might have less people saying they're fed up of hearing about data, and hopefully move things on slightly. So I'm going to hand over to Kim now to bring some colour to some of that very dreary backdrop that I've just set for us all.
Start with two quick polls. So we can have the first poll, please. has COVID-19 changed your view on the increasing use of technology in pensions? Yes or no? Oh, quite marginal. Okay. Moving on to the second poll. What has been the main roadblock in investing in technology for your scheme? Is it cost, membership demographic not being tech savvy, cyber risk, relying on your administrator to drive the increased use of technology, or just not sure where to start? Okay, so 40% cost, which is understandable, and reliance on the administrator. Okay, very good. If we can then move on to the next slide. It's a very busy slide, so I do apologize for that. But I think we're all quite aware that the world around us is evolving at quite a rapid pace in terms of new companies delivering innovative solutions across the board. And COVID-19 has sped up the adoption of these technologies by several years. If we look at this past year, things like DocuSign, Zoom, Teams, Google Classroom, and Peloton for our online workouts has all made our lives this year a little bit easier. I have to admit that I am a bit of a tech and data geek. And back in 2016, when I returned to London after 2 years on a South African assignment, I spent a bit of time exploring this evolving technology landscape. I opened up some online bank accounts with Monzo, Starling, and Revolut, and was amazed that with each of these accounts, I was able to open up my account in less than 3 minutes. And this was using voice, video, facial recognition, and just a photo of my passport or driver's license. And during this crazy year, I was very grateful that, as tough as it has been, I was able to do most of what I wanted to do online. I did have one experience of card fraud, but again, I was able to contact the bank via the chat function in the app. It was a person, not a robot, and I was able to cancel my card, order a new card, and the funds were refunded the next day. I think the advantage for the pension industry is that we can leverage what is being done in these other sectors and move things forward to solve our data problem. Next slide, please. After spending the majority of my career working for large corporates, I decided to change direction and work in a sector that had a social good element. It was early 2017. The PLSA DB task force had published their second report, The Case for Consolidation, and Clara Pensions was born. Right from the start, I have been challenging the status quo and looking to leverage what has been done in these other sectors with regard to data and technology. I may have been a bit of a pain sometimes. Next slide, please. So as Matt alluded to, solving the data problem is not simple, and people are tired of talking about it. But I think if we break it down into the smaller components, it actually makes solving this data problem easier. And we should now be focusing on the solution. For me, there are two key distinct areas when we're looking at the data in pensions, and that's member data and benefit data. And for me, the member data is actually the easier of the two to solve. At Clara, members are the heart of everything that we will do. And we know that data cleansing is going to be an ongoing journey. We all need to ensure that the member is who they say they are, and that we keep their personal details up to date and protected throughout the journey. As per my earlier very busy slide and the examples of the online banking, there are a number of providers today that are delivering digital identity solutions, and even the pension dashboard has put their identity service at the core of the program. We need to make sure that we're protecting savers and delivering safer solutions. If we look at all the member data, there are also new technology solutions that are helping with the validation of things like address and bank account. For address, you now have a postal address checker and validator, so looking at postcode and whether that is a valid address. And now with online banking, you have the confirmation of payee, which is checking that the account actually belongs to a member. So all these enhancements and checks and validations should protect members from scams and ensure that we're paying the right person and we know that they are who they say they are. Working directly with the member through the portals is also going to be the most cost-effective way in the long term. And we need to ensure that we are driving member engagement, speaking to our members and delivering what they want and not what we think they want. The more tricky bit is the benefits, as these have evolved over decades, with many records still being in paper, or worse, microfiche. So here you will need your pension experts working with technology to solve this problem. But again, with benefits, you can break all of these down into their various components. And as an industry, we need to have a common data dictionary on how we define these components. This is also going to assist in making transitions from administrator to administrator more efficient, as we'll all be speaking the same language. Administrators also need to ensure that the data is really well structured in their systems and that the key fields or information are not captured in notes or comment fields. Where we have data in paper, etc., you now have tools where you can scan that data, or what they call OCR the document, which will convert the document into a PDF that is editable and the data becomes searchable. So quite a bit of progress has been made to help solve some of the member issues as well as sorting out some of the benefits. Next slide, please. So Matt also covered all the different areas of member data, but if we look at member portals, I was encouraged yesterday to see at the dashboard session that 68% of participants offered digital solutions and that 52% of members wanted digital. Encouraging member engagement will reduce your costs in the long run. And as we said in the previous slide, we now have digital identity, the checks on address and bank accounts, and you'll also allow your member to update marital status, address, nominated beneficiaries, view the documentation for the scheme, ultimately retire online, track their requests and have transparency on any queries that they've raised. To drive engagement, I think people want to be able to run benefit modeling. You want to be able to provide communication and news and scheme updates. And again, as I said earlier, I think the key part of engagement is to make sure we're talking to the members and asking them what they want and delivering as best we can. Next slide, please. So I think Matt also mentioned all the different drivers at the moment for change in the pension industry. So I'm not going to go through this in more detail, but I think it is all now there with a common objective that we're trying to make things better for members and protect members by having all these drivers, and members expect more themselves. Next slide, please. So at Clara, and we are a bridge to buyout, we recognize that good quality data will facilitate better risk management and a better member experience. Our strategy is quite clear. We want to continue with data cleansing throughout the entire journey. The mechanism to transfer to Clara is a bulk transfer without member consent. And for schemes wanting to move to Clara, it will be similar to the questions that you get asked by a bulk annuity provider, as Matt mentioned earlier. We're also going to want to know, who is your administrator? Do you carry out regular existence and mortality checks? Where are you on your GMP journey? Do you have a member portal? What is the state of your scheme documents? Is it on a system or still in paper? All these things, as we said in the slides earlier, we're all driving to a common objective to solving this data dilemma. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Kim. Thanks, Matt. So I'm Andrew Lowe, Change and Data Solutions Director at Equiniti, looking after a number of digitization, automation type initiatives, as well as large-scale remediation activities. So, you know, as Matt and Kim have alluded to, there's huge importance on data to make sure that we can achieve the objectives and outcomes that we're looking for in those areas. So what we're going to do in this hopefully short session is build on some of the background that Matt and Kim have talked about, and talk about some hot topics in the industry, and try to look at them quickly from a data perspective. We've got half a dozen that we'll touch on, some of which Matt and Kim have already mentioned. Did consider starting off with a poll here, similar to Kim's section, but actually I suspect that the result of a poll as to which of these 6 areas were important to you would provide a pretty big, pretty broad split, and potentially have a lot of you going, well, actually, no, that's not the area that's important to me right now. It's something else. So what I would suggest is, rather than me take a poll, that you really put forward your thoughts on the areas that are important to you, to your schemes, and the areas where data is causing you problems, and then perhaps we can discuss them in the open session in a few minutes. So if we move on to the next slide, I think perfect timing, because I can see something in the chat where somebody said 2 words: GMP equalization. So yeah, GMP right off the bat, and I think you know, everybody's at a different stage in their GMP journey. Whether you're still considering elements of reconciliation or rectification, but equalization is clearly going to be the most significant and potentially complex element of your GMP journey, and there's no doubt that data is at the heart of that. And the reason why I've put this top of my list of subjects that's worth talking about is not just the complexity and the immediacy of the problem, but also the fact that the data that we're talking about here dates back over 40 years. It's often conflicting, it's not complete, it's not digitized always in a way that is easy to handle. And there is a clear risk in your GMP journey, and your GMP equalization journey in particular, of turning, if your data isn't right, you can turn your GMP equalization exercise into a benefit audit. Now, that might be something you want to do, but it might not. And I think, you know, your actual data requirements for GMP equalization in particular are very dependent on the approach you want to take to the calculation. So I think what I'm really trying to say there is that for some of these priorities, data priorities, it's crucial to understand what your objectives are, the outcomes that you're looking for are, before you go straight into looking at what data you've got and what your data issues are. And conveniently, looking again at the chat, that we've also got McCloud, which is another obviously key regulatory issue for public sector here, and in terms of data. And this is, you know, for those of you who may not be aware of the McCloud background, this is obviously, you know, removal of discrimination post the introduction of the Hutton reform schemes in the public sector. There's consultation ongoing at the moment as to what the solution for that will be. Ultimately, it is highly likely that members will be allowed to choose whether or not they should, their benefits accrued between 2014, 2015 and the remedy end date, which is likely to be 2022, will be in their old scheme or the scheme that was introduced in 2014-15, depending on the public sector scheme that they're in. I suspect it will be the biggest one-off remediation exercise ever undertaken. There are going to be hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of members impacted, depending on how it all shakes out. And I think that the key thing here is what we've got is a need to collect data that in some instances was previously thought not to be required. And going back and trying to obtain that, and in some instances from employers who may no longer exist as either distinct entities or even at all, that poses a serious set of concerns and problems in terms of the data space. So a lot of attention needs to be paid to that. There are questions around how it, you know, where it may be obtained from, what can be done if it can't be obtained, whether it can be derived from other data. So lots of questions to answer in that space. On this slide, we've also got the buy-in, buy-out sort of journey as well. As Kim mentioned, this is removal of risk from the scheme, from the trustees, by purchase of annuities from an insurer, or transferring of the entire liability to the insurer. And I think the key thing that here is, back to Matt's point around, sometimes people say they're fed up hearing about data. I mean, this is somewhere where an area where there can be an immediately tangible impact on your scheme finances. If you're looking at buy-in, buy-out, you have got poor quality data. That will be taken account of by any insurer who's looking who you're looking to insure with. And we've seen certainly examples of 5% or even more loading to premiums there. And if you're talking about an 8, 9, 10 figure buyout, that's an awful lot of money. So spending some time and effort ensuring that your data's right up front is crucial. If we can carry on to the next slide, we've got consolidation there, which again, Kim's spoken about, so I won't dwell on for a great deal of time. Suffice to say that a lot of the considerations in the buy-in, buy-out space are similar here, because whilst it may be a different entity that you're transferring to in the first instance, at least, the same considerations apply. Again, we've mentioned pensions dashboard, which is something very close to my own heart personally, something that I'm hugely passionate about, but the real pitfalls of it, as much as it is a potentially once in a generation opportunity to engage individuals right across the country in retirement saving, it will fall down if the data that's provided is either incomplete, incorrect, or inconsistent. And those challenges to make that happen will be different depending on the scheme that you've got, the sector that you're in, and your approach to technology and to data to this point. So lots of things to consider there. I think something that I'll come back to in a minute. Kim talked about potential data dictionary and standardized format structure for data. Not for a minute suggesting that everybody needs to be tail wagging the dog in terms of any data standards set by the dashboard or things that we all need to follow, but having some sort of common vernacular, some common data dictionary, data format, data structure for certain elements will inevitably cause ripples up front, but give us greater consistency and opportunity to move forward down the track when it comes to all sorts of technology. And again, we've talked about the need for technology to progress, to keep up in the pensions industry, but without quality data, and I would absolutely echo Matt's point of data being at the center of it. You wouldn't buy a Formula One car and put diesel in it. If you put poor quality data into expensive technology, you just will not get the value out of it. You won't engage your members. You won't make the efficiencies in terms of business as usual, ongoing administration. So having your data right and aligned to your business as usual delivery agenda, to your change agenda, is absolutely essential. And I think just to finish off my sort of short section here, I think the key thing that I would say is making sure that you've got a data strategy that includes improving the quality of your data or protecting the quality of your data, that supports your entire data supply chain, that thinks about your data format and structure across the whole variety of tools that you're looking to use or projects that you're looking to support, is absolutely crucial. If you treat data as an individual element of day-to-day delivery or individual projects, then that's when you start to see that first hand-drawn graph that Matt had of the, the variable effort with the variable results. Whereas if we get some steady, consistent effort and get quality data controls in place, then you will start to see higher quality overall, and then reduced effort as we move forward. So that's all I've got to say right now. I think, Alyshia, you were going to do a poll to sort of finish us off.
Yes, absolutely. So thank you both, all of you, Matt, Kim and Andrew, for sort of introducing all of the topics well there. I think we're going to have a poll now just to take the mood in the virtual room. So following this session, are you now more inclined to investigate technology-driven solutions? It's just a yes or no, please. And we'll see, we'll sort of start the discussion from there, because I think you've all made a very compelling case. So let's see what the audience feel. So yes, so we've got an answer. 67% of people are responding yes, they are more inclined to investigate technology-driven solutions. I'll go to maybe Kim, just to sort of take your feel on that response. Does that give you heart, Kim, or
it does give me heart. I think the initial one being fairly marginal, that COVID was 55 versus 45. I think this is slightly more positive, so encouraged.
Excellent. That's good. That's good. So I might put a question to both Matt, Kim and Andrew, or all of you, Matt, Kim and Andrew, in turn, about something that Matt raised quite early on, really, which was about sort of the cynics, the data cynics. I wonder what you sort of say, given the response of the audience seems to be quite positive to sort of your message and to your story here. What do you normally say to people that are sort of cynical and that see the challenges rather than the opportunities? Maybe Matt first, then Kim, then Andrew would be great.
Yeah, thanks, Alyshia. I mean, as I said, I think, to be fair, it doesn't get leveled too many times these days, and I think the reality of why that is because it's really an understanding and kind of an appreciation thing. I think it's like anything, once people have kind of started on that journey, the further down the journey they get, they start having that appreciation for actually, okay, get this now, because actually if the data's right, it's way easier to send out our benefit statements each year, or it's way easier to use the member sort of online portal and that sort of thing, and that reduces admin overheads and that sort of thing. So I think by and large, you can usually find some practical examples. And again, happily these days, there are more and more examples of data being used as a positive within pensions that you can start pointing people towards those. And obviously nothing helps people understand like sort of stories or examples where it's worked really well. So actually the more you can do that and bring it to life for people, then actually then they can start appreciating, okay, yeah, if we have this, or actually if we do, what is still, I don't want people to still find it boring and not exciting. But if you do some of that boring and unexciting stuff, the good, interesting, more sexy stuff comes a bit easier in terms of comms and things like that. So there's usually some good examples you can draw on that can kind of prove the point to people.
I think Matt covered most of it there. So it's all about just going through, providing workable solutions and kind of looking at the problems that that specific scheme is facing, and kind of looking at what cost-effective methods can be used to solve. As I said in my portion of the chat, was kind of break it into small bite-sized chunks. We're not trying to solve everything. So if we just start with one problem at a time, I think we can make progress.
Yeah, and I think I would agree. I mean, there isn't an awful lot to add. I think Matt's point of making of giving people examples is absolutely spot on. If you can demonstrate what it is that data's holding you back from, then people, I would suggest people tend to be quite easily convinced.
I think Kim touched on a really good point. Let's just jump in, because actually it's the pragmatism element as well. Because I think, and I can see someone's asked the question around sort of cost effective and that sort of thing. I'm sure Andrew and Kim definitely are. People like me like to look at technology and think of all the great things you could do with it. It's not always the right thing that you spend loads of money on the latest kind of cutting edge tech, because it might look great and sound great, and it probably is great. And who doesn't want robots and AI and all that sort of stuff in the pensions operation? It isn't always the right way, and actually it does need to be, Kim's right, pragmatic, and you have to we have to rein ourselves in. But that's a really good point, actually, because you can lose people if you're not being pragmatic.
Thank you. I've got a question in on the chat, which was, and I'm going to read it out verbatim because it sort of it introduces some really interesting topics. I'm going to read it out. Do we need the digital equivalent of mystery shoppers to keep testing that data defenses are secure? Ethical hacking, penetration testing, whatever you want to call it. Is this more important now than ever before? I don't know who wants to go first there, because it's a great question, I think.
Happy to start. I think, and we're seeing it with the dashboard, that with the identity service and cyber and making sure that everything complies with the cyber standards is really key. So I think everyone who's delivering an online or digital solution is ensuring that it is kind of cyber safe. I think the pension industry has been protected by being a little bit less digital from these kind of ransomware and cyber attacks. And the more we go digital and online, the more we need to have this kind of robust testing across the board.
Thanks, Kim. I'm going to ask another question because we've had a couple in. So the use of technology in controlling data must be fairly new. And this sort of links to the question that Matt sort of alluded to earlier about cost effectiveness. So I think this is particularly in relation to GMPs, I think. But going back 40 years or more to ensure factual data, is that cost effective? Andrew, I don't know if you wanted to.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one, and I think that it's a challenge. It's maybe not unique to pensions, but it certainly doesn't. It's certainly not something that is as important in, say, for example, other financial sort of fintech type areas. Because if I'm looking at my bank account or some other form of savings, I'm interested in my balance and my recent transactions. I'm not interested in what happened in 2005 or 1992 or whatever it might have been. Whereas to understand full pensions accrual with the legacy, issues that we've got in particularly in the UK, it's harder to say we don't need that. I think there are, and I think this is what I was alluding to when we were talking about GMP, is what is it that we're trying to achieve? And actually, let's not let perfect be the enemy of very good, because we can sometimes try to do too much, and actually, that the suggestion there was 10 years versus 40 years, whatever the right answer is, whatever the right balance is, we should look to draw that right balance and achieve the right outcome, because the cost benefit of going way back into the mists of time, it just won't be there a lot of the time. So I think that's an excellent point, and it goes, as I say, it goes back to work out what your objectives and your outcomes truly are, and then start thinking about what that means from a data perspective and how it helps shape your data strategy.
Thank you so much. And we are severely running out of time, but I would like to sneak in the final question, if I may. So maybe one word answers from everybody. So the final question that we've had in is about how difficult you think it is to influence stakeholders to invest in data and technology, and specifically over the next couple of years. So I think I sort of asked a sort of data cynics question, but any other hints or tips, sort of short answers, please, those, because we are severely running out of time.
Yeah, happy to go. I think, again, just providing use cases and showing the cost benefit analysis of, building a portal versus spending loads on sending out post and trying to search for members and things like that. Actually, in the long run, that is far more expensive. And you could also be paying benefits to dead people. So you want to make sure that all your members are actually still alive. So I think the cost benefit should sway the sponsors. Sorry, that was longer than one sentence.
Yeah, but it was spot on, and it saves me adding another sentence, Kim, because it's all about cost benefit. If you can demonstrate the value of it, then there should always be a business case.
And Matt, do you have anything to add? So anything, the sort of one-word answer about investing in data and technology, specifically in COVID times, anything? I mean, I think Kim's been sort of heralded as having an excellent answer by Andrew. So it's sort of a challenge to see if you've come up with anything else.
I don't think I have to, and I think business case is the key point, as you said. I think there are usually ways, it is an investment ultimately, and it's an investment, not a cost. I think if people can view it as that, and actually there are ways of helping people appreciate that and plan for that, then actually, yeah, it should be doable. And again, back to the pragmatism point, it doesn't have to be a huge investment and a huge undertaking. There are practical, pragmatic ways of helping with some of these problems, even in the current environment.
Excellent, thank you. I think the only other question that I would like to ask you all is do you think the sort of similar actually to the previous, but do you think that the future is positive? You know, we've all talked today about the sort of, it's a journey and it's moving in the right direction. Does that seem a fair characterization to you, or do you think that there really are significant hurdles that need to be overcome? Maybe Matt first, then Andrew, then Kim, please.
Yeah, no, I think there's lots of reason positivity. I think, as everything in pensions, it's very hard to advocate a single off-the-shelf either plan or solution for everyone, because there are so many different permutations and benefit structures and all that sort of stuff. So I think it isn't the same for anyone, but I think there is really good progress being made. I think there's some really cool sort of innovative tech that's happening both in pensions, but also sort of relatively closely adjacent to pensions, which is also a good thing as well. And we've got big things like pensions dashboard program, where everyone thinks of that is going to be a driver for change, and actually the ecosystem that creates is something that's needed. So I think, yeah, there are, I mean, as you said, that there's always complexities, and I think there will be, at the tail end, there will always be something that probably will always be too hard, or a scheme that's just too tricky, and that's probably okay. We shouldn't, again, beat ourselves up too much for that. But the point is, are we kind of chipping away and kind of digging into the problem? I think if we are, which we are at the moment, then that's a positive thing, which we should encourage and should be seen as just that, basically. So.
Yeah, again, I would agree with that. If I just look quickly at my own personal experience, I've been working in this sort of area probably in a more specific way for the last half dozen years. Probably even at that point in time, the gap between having data available of the right quality to do the things that we wanted to do in 2014, 2015 was much larger than it is today. So, you know, far better progress towards where we need to be. I think if I was to say one thing, I don't think we've quite crossed over to the point where we're, as an industry, this isn't uniform, but as an industry, I don't think we've quite reached the point where we are pre-preparing our data for tomorrow's challenges and tomorrow's needs yet. And I think that's the step that certainly everybody on this call would like us to get to. So, you know, we're almost caught up. Now we've got to take data ahead of the game, I think is where I would say we are.
Yep, so I agree with both what Matt and Andrew have said. And I do think, though, that we've started the journey, and I think there's going to be a lot of positive change in the next couple of years.
I'd just like to take the opportunity, because obviously we can't clap, but I'd like to take the opportunity to clap for on behalf of the audience and for myself as well. So thank you so much for being such a great panel.